Let me tell you what my deep research and basically vision is.
I hope there's Bigfoot. I don't think there is.
I'm not telling you nothing.
The aliens won't let it happen.
Happening now, breaking.
Bernie Sanders is angry.
Bears beats Battlestar Galactica.
What are the tips? Give me some tips on how to work with Wes Anderson.
Be ready to speak very fast and very clearly, because that's definitely one key thing.
I will only tell the truth.
Until you and 6 kids you barely know in wet bathing suits have surrounded 9 chimpanzees outside of a Wendy's. You probably really don't know yourself, okay?
Yep. And we back.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to your new favorite podcast and the best in political, sports, and paranormal news coverage. I'm your host, Wes Anderson. This is In the Shed. This is episode 82, our Halloween special Ghost Stories edition. So whether you're back for more or finding us for the first time this week, hey, thanks for tuning in. It is Halloween, my babies, and I am in a shed in the backyard of my home in Alabama in the middle of the night to share some ghost stories with you. So light a candle, gather around a campfire, turn out the lights, and prepare for a show like none other. There's no news this week, no listener emails, no comments or corrections, no election coverage. Just me and you in my shed in the backyard of my home in Alabama in the middle of the night on Halloween for some ghost stories. So let's jump right in the world that we always begin in, the world of politics, with some political ghost stories. Is the White House haunted? Spooky stories reveal a history of the supernatural. Over 2 centuries old, the White House has experienced its fair share of ghostly sightings and odd bump-in-the-night noises. There have been accounts of paranormal encounters with long-gone residents, including one of our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, the 3rd President of the United States. The most well-known spirit to haunt the White House is without question Abraham Lincoln's ghost, the 16th President. His hallways have been filled with strange musical melodies and other eerie sounds. Over time, more occurrences have been recorded. Here's a look at some of the strange ghost experiences that staff, visitors, and past residents have had while in the White House. A musical presidential apparition. The 3rd President of the U.S. was a great lover of music. Jefferson enjoyed playing the violin. He owned at least 3 violins in his lifetime and was considered a very talented musician. It is said that the ghost of Thomas Jefferson can be heard playing his violin in the Yellow Oval Room. First Lady Mary Todd Lincoln reportedly told a friend, my, how that Mr. Jefferson does play the violin." Having seen the spirits of her son Willie and husband Abraham several times, the First Lady claimed to have heard Jefferson playing his violin in the Yellow Oval Office. And that doesn't even bother me. That doesn't seem scary or frightening in the slightest. That sounds soothing. You just chilling and relaxing to some ghostly violin music. Some heavenly music, or well, I'm making assumptions. I didn't know there was a yellow Oval Office. I'm not familiar with the White House. I've never been invited. Trump or Kamala, holler at your boy. The untimely death of Lincoln's son, Willie. Apparently he had a son named Willie. Both the president and Mary have said that they received several visits from their son Willie after his death. Both the president and Mary have said they received several visits from their son Willie after his death. Mary said that she had seen her son at the foot of her bed. In the 1870s, a staff person of the Grant administration reported having a conversation with Willie Lincoln, while several staff members have said they saw Willie's spirit throughout the White House. And I didn't know that Abraham had a son named Willie. Abraham is such a distinguished name to go with Willie for your child. I'm not sure if that would be comforting to see your child or terrifying. Maybe a mix of both. Several sightings of Abraham Lincoln's ghost. After his assassination in 1865, Lincoln's ghost is said to have appeared in the Yellow Oval Room and the Lincoln bedroom. That Yellow Oval Room is a place that I would stay out of if I were to visit. Materializing to First Lady Grace Coolidge, wife of then President Calvin Coolidge, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands, Lincoln is the most common spirit to haunt the halls of the White House. At least the most common spirit that is not an alcoholic spirit, I would say. First Lady Grace Coolidge revealed in the American Magazine of viewing the ghost of President Lincoln standing by a window in his office, presently the Lincoln bedroom. The First Lady reported that she was looking out toward the Potomac River, which she presumed to be a Civil War battlefield. In a 1940 visit, after emerging from a bath, Churchill, naked and smoking a cigar, walked into the main bedroom and saw the spirit of Abraham Lincoln standing by the fireplace. After that, he requested to never sleep in that room again. Churchill reportedly said, "Good evening, Mr. President. You seem to have me at a disadvantage." While visiting in 1942, the Queen, Wilhelmina of the Netherlands, heard a knock on her bedroom door. The same room given to Winston Churchill, the Lincoln bedroom. Upon opening the door, she saw the ghost of Lincoln and fainted. And I probably would too. I would probably faint. The smell of lavender in the air. On several occasions, White House residents and staff members have either seen the ghost of Abigail Adams, America's second First Lady, doing her laundry, or reported the smell of lavender and damp clothing in the East Room. While living at the White House, First Lady Lou Hoover, the wife of 31st President Herbert Hoover, had seen the ghost of Abigail Adams entering the doors of the East Room, where Adams and the staff were known to hang the family's laundry on the clothesline. Several staff members have reported smelling the scent of lavender and wet clothes near the East Room as well. The Roaring Twenties visit the White House. In a 2018 interview on The Kelly Clarkson Show, and as reported on this show, Jenna Bush Hager said that she heard 1920s piano music coming from the fireplace in her room. Our phone rang, and I woke up, and all of a sudden we heard 1920s piano music coming out of the fireplace. It was the middle of the night, and you can feel the music coming out of the fireplace. George W. Bush's daughters, Jenna and Barbara, twice heard music coming from the fireplace in the Lincoln Room. Jenna told co-host Hoda Kotib on the Today Show that they heard 1920s piano music one week and opera music the next. And again, that one is not necessarily as creepy as the others. Running into the ghost of Abraham Lincoln would scare me a lot more, I think, than the smell of lavender in the air, or music coming from a fireplace that could have just been explained by the acoustics of the room or the floor plan, maybe. I don't know. I'm just spitballing. But apparently the White House is a very haunted building. It's been around for a long time, and many visitors and first ladies alike have seen something strange, some type of apparition, some former president or president's child or first lady, or heard some music or the sweet scent of lavender in the air. A very specific smell, but it's what they smelled. I don't know. What do you make of this story? What say you? Do you believe the White House is haunted? Do you believe these reports? Do you find them spooky or just interesting? Are you spooked out yet, my babies? My people, my tools? If not, hang in there. We're just getting started. JFK's ghost allegedly hangs out in a Boston seafood joint. Ooh. John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, undeniably left his mark on the nation. Some of the ways he did this are more obvious than others. We all know the quote, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Just as famous are Kennedy's views on civil rights, JFK's handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and his tragic assassination. Fewer people remember that he won a Pulitzer Prize, suggested teaming up with the Soviets to get to the moon, and installed a hidden tape recorder in the Oval Office, according to history. Perhaps the most obscure part of JFK's legacy, though, is that his ghost allegedly still lingers in a Massachusetts seafood restaurant. What could possibly possess the spirit of a former president to do such a thing? For breakfast, JFK was known to eat bacon, eggs, marmalade, and toast, and drink coffee, milk, and orange juice, according to the JFK Presidential Library. At lunchtime, he liked fruit, sandwiches, and soups. Come supper, it was chicken, lamb, steak, or turkey, with mashed potatoes, and maybe chocolate for dessert. The key to the supernatural mystery, however, is JFK's preference for seafood. New England fish chowder for lunch, and fish with baked beans for dinner. Supposedly, his love for marine dishes was so strong it often drove him to visit a Boston seafood joint, both in life and death. Located on the historic Freedom Trail in Boston, Massachusetts, the Union Oyster House is one of the oldest restaurants still operating in the United States. It's been serving food since 1826, though the building predates even the Revolutionary War. Its menu includes oysters, obviously, but also crab, lobster, and shrimp, as well as chicken, beef, and pork, plus plenty of desserts like cobbler, ice cream, and pie. The place has a rich history, and the Kennedy family was a part of that past. Like many of his relatives, JFK went there to dine upstairs in private. According to Nightly Spirits, his favorite dish was lobster stew, and his frequent patronage eventually led to his preferred table being designated the Kennedy booth. However, that's not the only lingering influence JFK left on this establishment. The former president's spirit still frequents his favorite haunt, or so people say. The story goes that JFK's ghost appears in the dining room, silently watching others eat. Strangely, it's not just his plaque-enshrined booth that he likes to visit, but also the bathroom. Too much clam chowder. Some claim to have seen this former president in the reflection of a restroom mirror. When somebody becomes a U.S. president, it's essentially guaranteed they'll be remembered for a very long time. It's hard to imagine these spooky tales are what JFK would have expected, though. Nevertheless, his legacy lives on, as does his choice eatery. So, of all the places that you might expect to find the spirit of JFK, who had a Boston seafood joint on your bingo card? Not the grassy knoll, not Marilyn Monroe's house, not the Texas Book Depository, or Lee Harvey Oswald's grave, not even the White House. The man is in a seafood joint in Boston, getting some clam chowder. Our ghost stories admittedly have not been very spooky so far. What is a little spooky is sitting out here in my shed in the middle of the night on Halloween, hanging out with you and sharing these ghost stories. So from the world of politics, we go to the world of sports. A collection of spooky sports stories. In honor of spooky season, we've rounded up some of the sports world's eeriest ghost stories. So grab a haunting beverage and get ready to dive into the shadows, because these tales are brewing up a cauldron of chills, and we will be the judge of that. Eddie Plank was the first left-handed pitcher to win 300 MLB games, playing for the Philadelphia Athletics in the early 1900s. He finished his career with 326 wins and earned a spot in baseball's Hall of Fame before his death in 1926. 70 years later, the owner of Plank's former Gettysburg residence, Peter Stitt, awoke to loud noises coming from within his home. Stitt said he could hear loud thuds, grunting, a whoosh sound, and footsteps. And I would stay away from those sounds, especially if I was living in Gettysburg. As the noises continued, they began to sound familiar to Stitt. He said they reminded him of a pitcher tossing balls and concluded that the ghost of the baseball legend must have returned to his home to continue spring training. When the noises halted just in time for MLB opening day in 1996, Stitt, along with many other believers in Plank's return, surmised that the Hall of Famer must have been satisfied with his final practice session before resting for good. In 2005, ESPN's Don Barone went to investigate the ghost story for himself, traveling to Gettysburg with a psychic. While Plank didn't come out to pitch during their visit, the psychic did claim to have a chat with him, during which Plank disclosed that the 1914 World Series was fixed, spilling piping hot tea from the grave. Of course, many don't believe this elaborate story, and the original incident is now thought of as a hoax, but it's hard to rule out the possibility entirely, especially coming from a mysterious city like Gettysburg. Toronto's Hall of Fame. Toronto's Hockey Hall of Fame is home to one of sport's scariest stories. The building originally housed the Bank of Montreal, where in 1953, 19-year-old bank employee Dorothy Mae Elliott attempted to take her own life in the women's restroom and died in the hospital the next day. Soon after, Dorothy's former bank colleagues began experiencing strange things, like flickering lights, footsteps following them, shrieking noises, and an overall feeling that someone was watching them, especially while in the women's restroom, which is never where you want to feel like somebody is watching you. Eventually, due to many reports of strange occurrences and overwhelmingly bad vibes, the bank installed a second bathroom. When the bank relocated, however, the reports from the original restroom continued. Today, Hall of Fame visitors report seeing a woman with long dark hair near the women's restroom on the second floor, along with the feeling of being watched or of hearing footsteps and screams, just like the bank employees did long ago. And that's a little frightening. The footsteps and the screams I could do without. I could do without those. Rochester's innovative field, formerly known as Frontier Field. Baseball is one of the oldest sports in North America, so it only makes sense that a handful of strange or unusual events have taken place on the diamond. That said, only one park is officially haunted, Rochester, New York's innovative field, home of the Rochester Red Wings, the Washington Nationals AAA affiliate. It was built in 1996 on a site that once held a warehouse, a schoolhouse, and a paper company. A ghostly janitor who is rumored to have haunted the paper company allegedly stuck around after it was demolished. To make things spookier, unidentified bones were found when ground was broken to begin construction for the field. And you probably should have stopped at that point. If you're finding unidentified bones, hey, this is not a place to build a baseball field. Okay. To this day, no one knows if the bones were human or not. I don't know how that's possible. It seems like they could, in 1996, find out if the bones were human or not. I digress. Rochester Paranormal declared the field haunted in 2004. Their proof? Photos depicting mysterious figures or floating entities and smoky-looking shapes. But what's more convincing are the stories from those who work there. From the clubhouse manager to the groundskeeper, many of the team staff have heard strange noises, seen dark shadows looming around the stadium, and thousands of crows seem to love the location. And that is creepy. I would be creeped out by that. Thousands of crows. Yeah. Many, many murders of crows. That's creepy. The Gipper and the Fighting Irish. In 1920, Notre Dame football player George Gipp had been out late celebrating the team's win against rival Northwestern. That night, after being locked out of his dorm, he slept outside and caught pneumonia, which tragically led to his death at just 25 years of age. After his passing, students who lived in the dorm reported hearing, stop us if you've heard this before, strange noises and footsteps in the hall. There were also reports of loud horns going off in the middle of the night. Moments before he died, Gipp told legendary coach Newt Rockne to just win one for the Gipper, a phrase still heard among Notre Dame players, and fans when they need a rally. His full speech is even showcased on a plaque in the locker room. Gipp's legacy even made it to the big screen. Prior to his day as president, Ronald Reagan played him in a movie about Coach Rockne, and in Rudy, the title character reads the plaque during his epic speech. To this day, students still report being spooked by what they assume is Gipp's ghost in the halls, but most aren't afraid for long. The Gipper is known as a friendly spirit on campus, and not a malevolent one. How we doing so far? Are you scared? Do you need a nightlight? If not, that's okay. We're about to move to the world of the paranormal, which we kind of have already been in tonight, but you know how the show goes. The most disturbing true crimes behind popular horror films. When it comes to horror, sometimes reality is more disturbing than fiction, and I told y'all we weren't going to cover the election tonight. Some of the most iconic horror movies actually have roots in real-life events, stories of true crime and terror that filmmakers adapt into chilling cinematic experiences. For those of you with the love for the macabre, here's a look at the true crimes that inspired some of the horror genre's most notorious films. Number 1, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, inspired by Ed Gein's gruesome crimes. In 1974, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre shocked audiences with its raw and brutal portrayal of a family of cannibals spearheaded by the chainsaw-wielding Leatherface. While Leatherface himself might be fiction, he was inspired by the real-life horror of Ed Gein, a 1950s Wisconsin grave robber and murderer who created grotesque items from human remains. Ugh, Ed Gein was nasty. Gein's crimes are infamous in the horror community, as he would dig up graves and fashion skin and bones into household objects, clothing, and masks. When police discovered Gein's farmhouse, they found skulls turned into bowls, lamps made from human skin, and even a skin suit. Gein's atrocities didn't end with grave robbing. He was also responsible for the murder of 2 women, leading to his arrest in 1957. And I didn't know that one. Surprisingly, I did not know that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre had any basis in reality at all. Very chilling. Number 2, The Conjuring, The Perron Family Haunting. James Wan's The Conjuring series has become a modern classic in horror, focusing on paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. The first film in the series, released in 2013, follows their investigation into the haunting of the Perron family in Rhode Island. While the Warrens' cases are subject to debate, the haunting itself has roots in real events experienced by the Perron family in the 1970s. The Perrons moved into an old farmhouse where they reportedly experienced frightening supernatural activity. They claimed to have encountered spirits, cold spots, and voices, and one particularly malevolent spirit. Bathsheba Sherman allegedly terrorized the family. The Warrens believed that Bathsheba was a witch who had cursed the property, leading to violent hauntings. And I would just move. Moving trucks are not that expensive. U-Haul can be your friend at times. I would have gotten out of there. I did know that that one was based on true events. Number 3, Scream, The Gainesville Ripper's Real Murders. Wes Craven's Scream reinvigorated the slasher genre in the late 90s, but not everyone knows that this meta-horror classic has ties to a true crime case. The Gainesville Ripper, a real-life serial killer named Danny Rolling, terrorized Florida in the early 1990s, committing 5 gruesome murders that shocked the nation. Danny Rolling targeted college students, breaking into their apartments and killing them in brutal ways. His acts involve extensive stalking and eerie precision, adding to the horror. His chilling spree earned him the moniker the Gainesville Ripper, and his crimes were covered heavily in the media, capturing the nation's fear. And also capturing my fear, as I sit here in a shed, unarmed, in the middle of the night on Halloween, in the backyard of my home in Alabama. I'm a fan of the Scream series, and I had no idea that it was based on something that actually happened. Number 4, the Amityville Horror, the Lutz family's paranormal nightmare. The Amityville Horror remains one of the most famous haunted house movies, inspired by the supposed haunting experienced by the Lutz family in 1975. The 70s were very haunted, apparently. After moving into a house where a brutal mass murder occurred just a year before, the Lutz family claimed they were plagued by paranormal forces, forcing them to flee after only 28 days. And they did the right thing in fleeing. As we have established on the show, U-Haul can be your friend at times. Ronald DeFeo Jr. murdered his entire family in the Amityville house in 1974. After the Lutzes moved in, they reported terrifying experiences such as strange smells, voices, and unseen forces. Although many have questioned the veracity of the Lutzes' claims, the story endures as one of the most famous hauntings in America. And that one, of course, I am very familiar with, as I'm sure you are as well. Number 5, Annabelle, the real-life haunted doll. No thank you. Before we go any further, let me just say, when it comes to haunted toys, no thank you. The Conjuring universe introduced horror fans to Annabelle, a cursed doll that wreaks havoc on its owners. However, Annabelle's real-life story, documented by Ed and Lorraine Warren, is even creepier. According to the Warrens, Annabelle was a Raggedy Ann doll, which is already creepy enough in my estimation, given to a nursing student in the 1970s who soon reported strange events. Annabelle would allegedly change positions, leave messages, and even attack visitors. Believing the doll was possessed by a spirit, the Warrens took Annabelle into their possession and locked her in their occult museum, where she remains to this day, encased behind glass with a sign reading, "Warning, positively do not open." And I don't want to open it. I don't want to have that doll in my possession, which is a strange choice of words for a doll that you believe is haunted. I did know that story. I knew the story of Annabelle. I knew the story of the Amityville Horror. I knew the story of The Conjuring, but I had no idea that the Scream series or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre were actually inspired by true events. Did you? And finally, 12 spine-chilling ghost stories for Halloween and beyond. Halloween is the perfect time to share ghost stories and spooky tales. In fact, the best Halloween stories feel so real, so believable, and so utterly chilling that they virtually guarantee you at least one night, if not more, spent tossing and turning while listening for creaking floors and the sound of ghostly moaning, or of things moving through your yard as you're sitting in your backyard shed behind your home in Alabama. Of course, that is the paradox inherent in ghost stories. The better they are, the worse you'll sleep at night. In the spirit of Halloween, we've rounded up some spooky stories, all of them true scary ghost experiences that are guaranteed to haunt you. Well-known psychic medium Christy Robinette even shared a ghost story of her own. So turn off the lights if you're brave enough, and get ready for horror stories so real and so terrifying that you won't sleep through the night. The Little Hands. I've never lived in a haunted house, but my mother did as a teen, writes Reddit.com user Patented Spacehook, recounting a true event. Other houses on her street had strange things going on too. A few homes away from her lived a family. One night the daughter went to bed with a bad headache. The next day she was dead. She'd passed away from an aneurysm. After her funeral, the family went away to get their minds off the tragedy, and the father asked my uncle, my mom's brother, to check on their pets. My mom and dad, who were dating at the time, went with him. My mother had heard that there was a grand piano and she wanted to play it. My dad was studying to be a veterinarian. After entering the house, my uncle and my father headed to the basement to see the animals, and my mother went to the piano on the ground floor. She was playing it when she felt something brush her ankles. She thought a cat must have left the basement and walked past her. She kept playing, and then she felt it again. She looked under the piano and saw nothing. When she started again, she felt hands clasp her legs tightly. She dashed to the basement door, called my uncle and father, and waited for them. Back outside, my uncle could tell my mom was rattled and asked what was wrong. She told him what happened, and he turned white. He told her the daughter who had died used to play a game with her father. When he played the piano, she'd crawl underneath, grab his ankles, and push his feet up and down on the pedals. No, thank you. That one is, that might be our first truly creepy story. of the evening, and I would never go in that house. Ever again. Ever again. The Red Lady of Huntington College. This urban legend dates back to 1910, but almost any student at Huntington College in Montgomery, Alabama should recognize it. That's because the events that led up to it are said to have actually happened. As the true story goes, in 1910, a young woman who was new to the school was known for her love of the color red. Sadly, she was also known for being strange and a loner. As the first term got underway, the young woman grew increasingly isolated. Eventually, she took her own life by slashing her wrists. Her body was discovered in a red gown drenched in blood. From then on, students and faculty have been reporting sightings of a young woman dressed all in red. She's appeared all around the college's campus. The figure dwelling in perpetual isolation is often cited as a reminder of the importance of being kind to one's peers. And this is my alma mater, okay? I went to Huntington College. I am familiar with this story. Every year, the sororities on campus dress one girl all in red, and they run through the campus knocking on doors and shrieking. And it's hilarious. And the story is terrifying. And as a freshman, you have no idea what is happening or why. The impish ghost. My neighbor Diane and I had a playful poltergeist for years, and we called it Billy. So begins Reddit.com user Abby's_alibi in their real-life ghost story. I'd come home and find something put in a weird place. Milk in a cupboard, toilet paper in the fridge, laundry detergent in the bathtub. Diane once called to ask if Billy had been around because she couldn't find a gallon of milk. We finally found it outside on her back steps. And sugar, darn sugar, every morning my sugar bowl was empty. When I'd had enough, I would point to Diane's home and yell, "Go see Diane." Within 5 minutes, I'd get a call from her. "Thanks a lot," she'd say. He'd gone and pulled shenanigans at her place. This occurred for the entire 2 years we lived there. No one believed us, not even our husbands. My mother thought someone was stealing from us when we were sleeping or out of the house. My sister believed that something was going on, but didn't know what. I still can't explain any of it. And I wouldn't be friends with Billy. I wouldn't be sending Billy to see my sister. I wouldn't be talking to Billy. And I wouldn't be amused by his shenanigans. Again, I would move. The Eerie Attic. Before Reddit.com user DigDolls got down to recounting their scariest ghost stories about living in a place that was obviously teeming with honest-to-goodness members of the spiritual world, they pointed out the irony of ghost stories that begin with the phrase, "I don't believe in ghosts, but..." After all, no matter how a ghost story begins, it always hinges on the notion that, come on, of course we believe in ghosts. A few years ago, I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Melbourne, Australia, they went on to recall. It was my first time living on my own. The apartment block had been built in the 1930s. I'd been there for a few months when I came home from work one day and went into the bathroom. I saw something strange. A wooden board which had covered a hole in the ceiling that led to a small attic space lay fractured in two pieces on the ground. I examined the pieces. The board was an inch thick, and it would have taken Bruce Lee to break it. I thought the landlord had sent someone to work on the attic. I was frozen stiff with fear. Someone is up there for sure, I thought. I emailed pictures to the landlord asking if anyone had been there, with an undertone of annoyance since she had not warned me. Her reply read, "Please call me as soon as you're able." And that is not... that is not a good sign. I will call you as soon as I'm able, but I would leave the house immediately. I called and she explained that her last two tenants had said the same thing happened. She promised to replace the board, and she did. A month later, I woke up one night around 4 a.m. My body was covered in goosebumps. It felt like someone was rubbing his or her hands on me. Everything was silent, but then I heard a dragging sound coming from above my bed. It was as if someone was pulling a sack of potatoes. I froze. How do you know? That's such a specific... Look, I'm creeped out, but that is such a specific example. How do you know what it sounds like for someone to pull a sack of potatoes? I digress. I froze, convinced someone was up there. There's no way an animal could make that sound. After 5 minutes, I worked up the courage to turn on the light, armed myself with a cricket bat, and walked to the bathroom. That's when I saw that the new board covering the hole was broken in two. I felt sick. The dragging sound had stopped, but I heard something else. Whispering. Oh no. Just get out of there. I'm yelling at the TV at this point. I know this is a podcast and I'm reading, but I am yelling at the TV. You have got to get out of there. The sound was clear and coming from the attic. It sounded like children's voices, which is somehow the worst sound to hear. And I could hear one sentence repeated over and over. It's your turn. It's your turn. I switched on every light in the apartment to make things feel normal. It was 5 a.m. and dark outside. I watched TV to try to unwind, then a fuse blew. My pet Budgie, is that a bird? I think that's a bird. Dexter, whom I kept in the kitchen, usually never made a sound at night. But he started squawking, definitely a bird, like he was being strangled. I never heard him make these sorts of noises before. He was screaming. I grabbed my car keys, ran out, sat in my car, and waited for the sun to come up. When I saw people walking their dogs, this comforted me enough to go back in. The front door was open, but I figured I might have forgotten to close it when I ran out. I went to the kitchen to check on Dexter, but he wasn't in his cage. I felt sick again. All my windows were closed, so I looked everywhere inside. When I walked to the bathroom, I heard splashing. Dexter was half drowned in the toilet. I took him out, washed him, and dried him. I was so confused. At 8 a.m., I called the landlord and gave her a watered-down version of the night. "Oh, wow. You heard the whispering, too," she said. "This is a terrible landlord. You should have told me the full story the first time I called you, not just said, yeah, past resident said the boards were broken. What do you mean you heard the whispers, too?" I digress. I stayed in that apartment for another 18 months. I heard the whispering on a few occasions, and twice the board covering the hole in the ceiling moved. Although I live somewhere else now, the landlord recently called. She said her new tenants had begged to speak with me about some of the stuff that's been going on. Forget it. It's their problem now. And that one is terrifying. That is a scary story. I cannot imagine experiencing those things, and I would not have made it 18 more minutes, let alone 18 months. The phantom patient. You may know about haunted hotels and haunted hospitals, but have you heard of a haunted ambulance? The ambulance company that I used to work for had a haunted ambulance, Rig 12, recounts Reddit.com user Zerbo. A lot of EMTs had stories about it, but I never put much stock in paranormal stuff. That is, until I had my own experience with Rig 12. My partner and I were working in a rural community around 3 a.m., and it was pitch black outside and completely quiet. We were both dozing off. I was in the driver's seat and she was in the passenger seat. I woke up to a muffled voice, but I thought my partner was talking. I told her I was trying to sleep and closed my eyes. I distinctly heard a male voice say, "Oh my God, am I dying?" followed by a few seconds of heavy breathing. My partner and I sat up straight and looked back into the patient compartment where it sounded like the voice had come from. Things were quiet for a couple of seconds, then we heard the click of an oxygen bottle regulator, and a hiss as if it was leaking. I turned on the lights and we ran out of the rig. I thought a transient might have climbed in while we were asleep, so we opened the rear doors. No one was there. I checked the oxygen bottles and neither one had been opened. We didn't sleep much after that. I guess not. I guess you probably didn't sleep. My question is, did you get a new ambulance to drive? Because I would not have gotten back in it. Call me a fraidy cat, but I would not have gotten back in it. The princes in the tower. This is the story of two young princes, brothers Edward and Richard, who were imprisoned in the Tower of London to prevent them from becoming king and heir apparent, respectively. In April 1483, when King Edward IV died, his eldest son, Edward V, who was just 12 years old, briefly became king. Because of his young age, he had a regent appointed. That regent was the young king's uncle, known as the Duke of Gloucester. This uncle was known to be deeply resentful that the boys even existed. If it weren't for them, he would have been next in line of succession. What happened next is shrouded in mystery indeed, is one of the strangest British royal family mysteries. It seems that the young king and his brother Richard, the Duke of York, were kidnapped and locked away in the Tower of London, after which the Duke of Gloucester declared himself King Richard III. The 2 young princes were never seen or heard from again, and 2 small skeletons were eventually found in the tower are believed to be all that's left of them, other than the ghostly apparitions, that is. British papers have reported on visitors who claim to have seen the ghostly figures. Are these scary stories nothing more than tabloid fodder, or are they proof of the paranormal? That's for you to decide. And the royal family is strange. You look into that history a little bit. You lift those rocks, and you start finding some odd, truly odd events. And this is just one of them. The boy with no eyes. A boy with no eyes sounds like a scary Halloween costume for sure. One night when I was 10, I was woken up by my bedroom door opening, followed by someone sitting on my bed. Reddit.com user KMendo4 recalls of a childhood brush with a very persistent ghostly apparition. I felt my leg raised and the bed sink under a person's weight. It's just Mom, I thought, and I opened my eyes. I bet it's not your mom. I digress. It was not my mom. I told you so. I found an eyeless boy. He had black empty sockets about my age sitting at the foot of my bed. He extended his hand and in it was a little box. I was startled but reached out. Why? Why would you reach out? If you are startled, you fight or you run. You don't reach out for the box in the boy's hands who has no eyes. He pulled back. I reached again and said, "Give it." Then I blinked, and when I reopened my eyes, he was gone. But I could still see the imprint where he'd sat on my bed. Fast forward 5 years. My girlfriend came over to do homework. After she finished, she took a nap while she waited for her parents. When they arrived, I tried waking her up. She opened her eyes suddenly, looking up at a corner where the wall met the ceiling. She pointed there and went back to sleep. I shook her again. She came to full consciousness, and I explained what she'd done. She looked haunted. Up on the wall, I saw a little boy with no eyes. He was there in a Spider-Man pose staring at me. I freaked out and told her my story about the same kid. Fast forward another 5 years. I was with the same girlfriend, and we had a 2-year-old. We were living in my parents' house in my old room. My daughter started waking up at the same time every night, and she'd talk. After a while, I noticed she had almost the same conversation every night. I playfully asked her once whom she was talking to. She said, "It's a little boy. He's nice. He's lost, and he's looking for his mommy." My daughter's nightly conversations continued until we got our own place later that year. And I do not care if the little boy is nice. He has no eyes. I'm not talking to him. I'm Helen Kellering that boy. Okay. I want nothing to do with him. At all. The Ashley Street Ghost. Huntingdon College, again, my alma mater, is just one of many haunted colleges in America, each with its own set of ghost stories. This next true tale comes from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. The haunting happened in 1972 at a party hosted by University of Michigan students living on Ashley Street. A 15-year-old girl who probably had no business being there in the first place suddenly felt a strange bone-chilling cold, according to the Michigan Daily. In an attempt to warm up, she went upstairs. That's when things really went awry. One of the walls of the house started moving and a black shadow approached the girl. Meanwhile, downstairs, posters were spontaneously popping off the walls and falling into a growing pile on the floor. The girl wandered back downstairs where she found herself saying these strange words. The drugs and addiction were my fault, and I accept responsibility for that, but I was not that way deep down inside. I want to apologize to everyone involved for what I have done. And that's not okay. That's not okay. This little girl who is 15 and should not be at this college party starts saying some crazy stuff, and I am out of there. I'm climbing out the window. I'm running out the front door. I'm finding a way out of there. What made those words even stranger was that the girl did not do drugs, let alone have an addiction. Her words didn't seem that strange to the students who lived in the house, though. Before they moved in, the house had been inhabited by a man with a very serious addiction. The reason he no longer lived there? He had died of a heroin overdose. Has the ghost of Ashley Street made any more appearances? that remains a mystery worthy of the most memorable horror stories. And that is creepy. The Ghost of Ashley Street. That is a creepy story for this girl to start repeating things that she probably had no knowledge of, and that she seemingly did not even know that she was saying. My answer, just like I have said so many times before tonight, would be to move. There is no rent that is that cheap. I am out of there. The Ghost of Frederick Jordan. This real-life ghost story concerns a man named Frederick Jordan who held one of the most lonely and desolate jobs in existence. Jordan was the lighthouse keeper for Penfield Reef Lighthouse off the coast of Fairfield, Connecticut. Built in 1874, the lighthouse was primarily a way of warning ships of a treacherous hidden reef responsible for more than its fair share of harbor accidents. In 1916, Frederick Jordan was the head lighthouse keeper. Tragically, he drowned in a boating accident just before Christmas of that year when he was caught in a gale while rowing home to see his family. Ever since then, lighting and equipment malfunctions in the lighthouse have been blamed on Jordan's spiritual presence. But even more chilling is that keepers of the Penfield Reef Lighthouse often find the lighthouse logbook open to the day that Jordan died, and locals have recounted witnessing an unidentifiable figure appearing on the water to help stray boats find their way to safety near the reef. And this man out here just protecting people. Old Frederick Jordan out here just keeping people safe, even in the afterlife. That one's not creepy. The Ghost Who Came to Play. This true ghost story might strike you as more awe than eek, but only until you consider that we really have no idea what our four-legged friends can sense that we cannot, including the scariest of scary stories. Can dogs see ghosts? Well, there are plenty of dog experts out there, including veterinarians, who will attest to the fact that there's lots of documentation that could support the notion that dogs can sense paranormal activity, as Dr. Jesus Aramendi, DMV, puts it. And that man's name is Jesus. If anybody knows, it's Dr. Jesus Aramendi. Take it to the bank. And then there's the fact that this story came to Reader's Digest directly from Robinette, who has used her ghost whispering skills to help detectives solve confounding cases. Marlene settled onto her side of the bed and patted Jack's pillow beside her, Robinette told Reader's Digest. A year had gone by, but Marlene was still adjusting to widowhood. Maybe it was crazy to think that after 40 years of marriage she would never adjust. Elmer, the golden retriever, seemed to understand this from the very first. That cold moonless night when Marlene returned alone from the hospital, Elmer did something he'd never done before. He jumped up onto Jack's side of the bed and lay his head on the pillow. Jack would never have allowed it, Robinette pointed out. But Marlene didn't shoo him off. Instead, she lay down beside Elmer and let the peaceful sound of his snoring lull her to sleep. The next night was the same, and the night after that. Over the past year, it had grown into a comforting routine, but not tonight. Tonight was the first time Elmer had let Marlene sleep alone in the bed since Jack's passing. But hearing nails clicking on the wood floor downstairs, Marlene recognized the sound of Elmer requesting outsies. With a sigh, Marlene made her way down the stairs to the foyer, but Elmer wasn't pacing in front of the big oak door. Rather, he was dancing and wagging and wiggling and bowing, just like he used to when Jack would come home from work. To Marlene, it felt as if Jack had just come home, and Robinette, who is known for her intuition about these things, believes that is indeed what happened. And that one is interesting. Dogs definitely can sense when we are sad, when we are happy. For that dog to immediately climb up in her husband's spot on the bed when she came home alone from the hospital is certainly something. Certainly very interesting. And then the only night after a year in which he was acting the same way that he did when his owner came home from work. Very interesting indeed. The lost colony of Roanoke. Roanoke Colony was one of the first European settlements in the United States. Located on an island off the coast of what is now the state of North Carolina, the colony was established in 1857 under the auspices of the first Queen Elizabeth. Soon after, the colony's leader, John White, returned to England where the settlers had come from. His trip was meant to be brief. He was only meant to grab more supplies and return to the New World. But political upheaval prevented White from returning until 1590. It was only 3 years, but a lot had changed when White returned. In fact, the entire colony, consisting at the time of 115 people, including a newborn baby by the name of Virginia Dare, was gone, just up and vanished. All that was left was a post onto which the word Croatoan had been carved. Croatoan referred to the name of a native tribe that had been on good terms with the settlers, so White thought the colonists had moved to Croatoan Island, now known as Hatteras, North Carolina. But they had not. It remains one of the most famous disappearances that no one can explain. What's more, there's never been any evidence to suggest that the colony had been massacred. Many believe that baby Virginia grew into a beautiful young woman, one who eventually fell into a doomed love affair with a native warrior by the name of Okisko. To this day, she haunts the woods in search of her man, often in the form of a diaphanous white deer, one that always vanishes at dawn. According to NCpedia, a state encyclopedia maintained by the North Carolina Government and Heritage Library, longtime residents of the island have no doubt that the identity of the phantom deer is the ghost of Virginia Dare. If you're itching for an explanation as to how an entire colony could just disappear, that's not simply more ghost stories. You're not alone. On the positive side, it's one of a handful of mysteries that could be solved in the next decade. And that is an interesting story, the lost colony of Roanoke, that we have covered in depth on this show before. We don't know what happened. I don't know that Virginia Dare's ghost haunts the forest in the form of a white deer. I think that most likely they experienced disease and famine and attacks from Native American tribes who are not so friendly, and if any of them survived, they probably relocated and maybe even assimilated into one of these friendly tribes. The ghost of the hanged man. One theme that many ghost stories have in common is that they offer a sense of justice in return for a wrongful death. This particular ghost story, however, offers a somewhat different take. It's about wrongful treatment in death and revenge in the afterlife. On October 13, 1877, Robert Schmalley was hanged after a trial that found him guilty of a terrifying and inexplicable murder spree. The townspeople were filled with so much anger and hatred that they left his body hanging for days. The tale says that not one of the townspeople demonstrated even a shred of remorse, let alone forgiveness. Since then, Schmalley has been said to haunt the town. Those who have seen him say he appears as a ghostly male figure, but as soon as the figure registers in your mind, it disappears into the darkness. That seems like the perfect ending to the best of ghost stories. So, those were definitely some interesting, thought-provoking, and even at times, creepy stories. A couple of those absolutely give me the willies. Not to be confused with Abraham Lincoln's son. What did you think about those stories? Which one did you find the creepiest? Email the show at intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. Find us on Twitter at intheshed4. I would love to hear from you. Happy Halloween to you. I hope you enjoyed our time together tonight, and I hope you enjoyed this special Halloween episode of In the Shed with Wes, Ghost Stories edition. That's all for this week. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. I can't either. It's back in the house and out of the shed for me. Thanks again for listening to episode 82. Make sure to subscribe, like, share, and review. It really does help. If you have any paranormal experiences, opinions about sports or politics that you'd like to share, you can email the show at intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. Again, that's intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. I might even read it on air. Join our membership club at patreon.com/intheshed4. Look for us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Pandora, the Good Pods app, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to follow us on X at InTheShed4, as well as subscribe to our YouTube channel at In the Shed with Wes Anderson 6670. Tune in again next week for our In the Shed with Wes Anderson Decision 2024 election night coverage. This has been In the Shed with Wes Anderson, the best news show in the land covering politics, sports, and the paranormal. Have an adventurous and fulfilling weekend. I'll catch you tools later. Peace out, Boy Scouts. Meemaw, we made it!
We sure did.